The whispers begin in the coastal villages of Benin, where the nights are longer than the roads and silence often means more than words. In these quiet towns, the people still speak of the serpent not as a symbol of evil, but as an ancestor, a spirit of wisdom and protection. For centuries, the serpent has slithered through West Africa's mythology, worshipped under many names: Dan, Aido Wedo, Oshumare, Aida Wedo. In Benin, the birthplace of Vodun, the serpent represents the bridge between earth and sky, the eternal cycle of life, death, and rebirth. But beneath this sacred imagery, another truth hides, one that modern investigators, journalists, and anthropologists have struggled to understand. Stories of cults devoted to the serpent have circulated for decades, whispering of rituals far darker than public worship. In parts of Nigeria, Togo, and Ghana, authorities have recorded unexplained disappearances, mutilations, and midnight ceremonies that blur the line between religion and crime. It is a story of faith corrupted by fear, tradition twisted into power, and secrecy sustained by generations of silence. The first threads of this investigation trace back to Ouidah, Benin, a city once central to the Atlantic slave trade. Here stands the Temple of Pythons, a modest structure where dozens of royal pythons roam freely, considered sacred and untouchable. The local priest, a man in his 70s named Hongundosu, explains that the snakes are not gods themselves, but vessels of divine energy. They represent continuity and wisdom, a reminder that humanity and nature share the same blood. Yet when questioned about darker practices linked to serpent cults in neighboring regions, he becomes still, eyes fixed on the floor. Some people use the name of the serpent for things that have no place in Vodun, he says softly. Those are not our ways. Across the border in Nigeria, similar traditions exist under different names. In parts of Edo and Delta states, the serpent is worshipped as part of the Ojidigan and Ovia cult systems, symbols of fertility, protection, and justice. But over time, some offshoots became infamous for their secrecy and alleged human rituals. Police records from the late 1990s to early 2000s list several incidents labeled as ritual killings with symbolic serpent markings. Investigators noted that victims were often found with carvings or paint resembling scales, their remains arranged in ritualistic patterns. While no direct link to any registered religious group could be proven, the patterns repeated across several regions, particularly in parts of Edo, Ogun, and Ondo. The earliest verified mention of an organized serpent cult involved the 1997 case of the Ikpoma Shrine murders in Edo State. Local residents discovered a hidden chamber beneath a house filled with carved idols, bones, and serpent motifs. Police detained 4 men claiming to be spiritual healers who insisted that the remains were part of an ancient fertility ceremony. DNA analysis, years later, identified several of the bones as human. The case quietly disappeared from headlines, but it marked the beginning of a pattern, one that would resurface in the decades that followed. By 2010, the cult stories had spread online. Social media users across Nigeria and Ghana shared photos of alleged initiation symbols, underground gatherings, and serpent-shaped charms linked to disappearances. Most were unverified, but a few had traceable origins. One such case occurred in 2012 near Pollsmoor, Togo, where villagers claimed that a secret society was abducting people to feed the serpent. Local police raided the site and found ritual pits, candles, and evidence of animal sacrifices, but also clothing fragments that matched missing persons reports. The officers, overwhelmed and unequipped for forensic investigation, closed the case as unconfirmed ritual activity. For years, these whispers drifted between rumor and reality. Academics dismissed them as exaggerations born of superstition. Journalists feared for their safety if they dug too deep. But in 2018, an independent documentary team from Ghana, working with a West African human rights network, uncovered video evidence suggesting that some of these groups were far more organized than anyone imagined. Hidden camera footage captured masked men in ceremonial robes invoking the spirit of the serpent before a circle of initiates. The ritual, they claimed, would grant protection and wealth, but at a price. One defector told investigators that initiates were required to bring offerings before rising in rank. Sometimes, he said, those offerings were not symbolic. Tracing these stories meant entering spaces where trust is a currency and outsiders are rarely welcome. In rural areas of Benin and southwestern Nigeria, the serpent's image appears in murals, sculptures, and talismans, yet each community defines it differently. For some, it's sacred. For others, it's feared. In one Nigerian village near Okitipupa, elders told the story of a family cursed after killing a python believed to be a reincarnated ancestor. Weeks later, strange markings appeared on their compound walls, scales painted in ash and oil. Whether coincidence or warning, no one could say. The connection between serpent worship and sacrifice became clearer in 2020 when Nigerian security agencies investigated a network operating between Lagos and Cotonou. The group, calling itself the Children of Dan, was allegedly responsible for a string of ritual-related killings linked to money rituals and ancestral oaths. In their possession, authorities found serpent carvings, bound scrolls, and encrypted communication logs referencing coded words like feeding, ascension, and purification. 5 members were arrested, but the group's leader escaped. According to the investigation, several of its rituals involved symbolic serpents, said to carry the offerings to the ancestors. The documents suggested that these rituals mixed elements of traditional Vodun, Christian mysticism, and occult symbolism, a fusion reflecting modern desperation more than ancient faith. Across interviews, one theme kept reappearing: the lure of power. In societies burdened by economic uncertainty and corruption, cults like these promised protection, success, and belonging. Sociologists described them as a response to social collapse, a way for disillusioned youth to reclaim control in an unstable world. When the institutions fail, people turn to whatever gives them meaning, said Dr. Kosi Egbeko, a Togolese anthropologist who has spent 20 years studying ritual movements. Some find comfort in religion, others in rebellion. The serpent stands for both. But not all stories are myths. In Ghana's Volta region, police archives hold a chilling case file labeled Serpent Covenant, 2019. The file details the disappearance of 2 teenage boys, last seen near a shrine in Aflao. Witnesses described strange night gatherings led by a priestess known only as Mama Essie. When officers raided the shrine, they found evidence of ritual materials, underground tunnels, and traces of human blood. Mama Essie was arrested but died mysteriously before trial. The community remained divided. Some called her a healer, others a murderer. The shrine was sealed, but villagers still report hearing drums from the forest at night. Throughout West Africa, these stories blur the line between belief and crime, culture and terror. The deeper one goes, the more the serpent becomes a mirror reflecting humanity's dual nature: wisdom and deceit, creation and destruction. For every priest preserving ancestral memory, there is another exploiting it for control or profit. That duality makes investigation nearly impossible. When journalists question practitioners, they are told they do not understand the spirits. When they question the police, they are told there is no evidence. Yet the evidence is scattered everywhere in missing person reports, in unmarked graves, in old tabloid clippings and whispered memories. Each piece forms part of a puzzle that spans generations and borders. From Benin's sacred pythons to Nigeria's underground cults, from Ghana's forest shrines to Togo's forbidden valleys, the serpent's shadow coils around them all. By 2023, international organizations had begun quietly documenting these incidents, not as isolated crimes, but as indicators of deeper cultural tension. The Human Rights Foundation of West Africa compiled dozens of testimonies from former cult members and relatives of victims. One chilling statement from a defector read, "The serpent does not eat for hunger, it eats to remember." Investigators interpreted this as symbolic, a representation of the cycle of power, where each act of sacrifice was seen as renewal. But to those who lost loved ones, it was literal. Today, the cult of the serpent remains one of the region's most guarded mysteries. It operates in whispers, surviving in the spaces where faith meets fear. Some claim it is dying, a remnant of superstition fading with modern education. Others believe it has merely adapted, moving online, recruiting through encrypted platforms, masking itself as New Age spirituality. Whatever the truth, one thing remains certain: the serpent still slithers through West Africa's collective memory, its scales glinting with both reverence and dread. The deeper question is not whether the cult exists, but what it reveals about the human need for control, connection, and transcendence. Across every interview, every police file, every shrine visit, the same pattern emerges: people searching for power over the chaos of their lives. The serpent, whether divine or deadly, offers that illusion. And so long as desperation endures, so too will its worship. Across West Africa, from the red soils of Benin to the coastal lagoons of Nigeria and the misty hills of Togo, the serpent has never been just an animal. It is the keeper of balance, the mediator between the visible and invisible worlds. For centuries, entire communities have built their spiritual lives around its symbolism. To understand how the modern serpent cult evolved into what it is today, one must first understand the belief system it was born from and how the serpent's sacred image became a vessel for both devotion and exploitation. In Benin's historical town of Ouida, the Temple of Pythons remains one of the most visible representations of serpent reverence. Inside a dimly lit compound, dozens of royal pythons slither freely along the floor. Devotees believe that these pythons embody the spirit of Dan, the Vodun deity of wisdom and continuity. When the rains arrive each year, the snakes leave the temple and enter nearby homes, a sign of blessing, never of intrusion. The people feed them, protect them, and gently return them when the season passes. It is said that to harm one is to bring misfortune upon an entire family. Here, the serpent is peace. Yet not far away, that same symbol has been invoked to justify acts that defy comprehension. In the late 2000s, anthropologists working in Benin's interior villages began to notice a disturbing shift. While traditional Vodun temples still practiced harmless rituals, animal offerings, dances, prayers, smaller splinter groups had begun incorporating more secretive, violent elements. These groups referred to themselves as La Fraternité du Dawn, the Brotherhood of the Serpent. They operated outside official Vodun hierarchy and rejected state oversight. What distinguished them was not the serpent as a symbol of wisdom, but as a conduit for power, a being to be fed, appeased, and feared. Former members who later spoke anonymously described initiations involving symbolic rebirths. The initiate would lie on the ground, surrounded by snake carvings, and have his body marked with ashes and oils representing scales. In some versions, a real python would be laid across the chest, the embrace of Dan, meant to signify union between human and spirit. For most, the rituals ended there. But according to testimonies collected between 2013 and 2020, other ceremonies went much further. In certain isolated shrines, initiates were allegedly made to swear oaths sealed not with animal sacrifice, but with human blood. The rationale, as described by one informant, was to bind the soul to the serpent's eternal hunger. These ceremonies took place deep in forests or in abandoned colonial structures, always at night and always in secrecy. Most victims, when identified, were reported missing long before their families ever suspected ritual involvement. In Nigeria, particularly in Edo and Delta states, the serpent's image holds both historical and spiritual weight. The Benin Kingdom's traditional religion once included serpent guardians known as Akin and Ovia. Shrines dedicated to these deities were sites of justice, places where offenders took oaths to prove innocence. But in recent decades, criminal elements and extremist cults have co-opted those same symbols for darker ends. A retired police investigator from Benin City recalls a 2014 raid on a rural compound in Ihor. Inside, officers found human skulls painted in green pigment and arranged in a coiled formation. Beneath them lay a carved serpent idol, half buried in sand. According to confessions obtained later, the group believed that feeding the serpent renewed its protection and returned strength to its followers. The belief structure behind these actions, however twisted, still echoes traditional cosmology. In Vodun and related West African faiths, the serpent embodies duality, male and female, creation and destruction, earth and sky. The deity Idohuedo, in particular, is believed to have shaped the world by coiling beneath it, his body forming mountains and rivers. He sustains creation, but also holds the power to unmake it. This dual nature has always fascinated worshippers and outsiders alike. Colonial records from the 1800s describe European traders encountering snake priests who performed divinations using live pythons, believing they carried messages from ancestors. As Christianity and Islam spread across the continent, many indigenous religions retreated into secrecy. This isolation created fertile ground for reinterpretation and, in some cases, corruption. By the mid-20th century, hybrid sects emerged, blending Christian imagery with Vodun symbolism. Sermons would invoke both Jesus and Dan. Prayers would alternate between church hymns and invocations of the serpent spirit. In urban centers, particularly Lagos, Accra, and Lome, these sects gained followers among the disillusioned poor, who saw in them a promise of quick transformation, a way to rise above hardship. One of the most notorious examples surfaced in 2015, when authorities uncovered a Lagos-based religious organization known as the House of Divine Renewal. Outwardly a church, it operated a hidden inner circle devoted to serpent worship. Members were told that prosperity came through entering the cycle of the serpent, a phrase meaning the acceptance of spiritual exchange, life for life, success for sacrifice. During the raid, investigators found ritual garments, scrolls inscribed with Latin and fawn invocations, and jars filled with blood. 10 members were arrested, 3 fled. Across borders, similar tales echoed. In Ghana's central and Volta regions, serpent symbolism merged with older Ewe traditions. There, the serpent was tied to Togbui Afotse, a deity of guardianship. His followers believed the spirit dwelled in sacred forests and only appeared to chosen initiates. In interviews conducted by a local journalist in 2019, villagers recounted strange gatherings led by self-proclaimed prophets who demanded gifts for the guardian. Some said livestock were used, others whispered it was people. No official charges were filed, but several disappearances were recorded in the same period. Researchers analyzing these cases emphasize that most serpent veneration in West Africa remains peaceful and symbolic. The core traditions of Vodun, Ifa, and traditional Ewe spirituality are centered on harmony with nature, not harm. Yet as modernization and economic hardship deepen, exploitative sects prey on people's desperation. They borrow familiar icons, the serpent, the ancestral mask, the sacred staff, but replace the teachings of balance with promises of dominance. It is in this distortion that the cult of the serpent, as feared today, truly takes root. The rituals themselves vary. In Togo's Atakpame region, observers documented initiation ceremonies where young men and women, stripped of worldly possessions, were anointed with oils while chanting invocations to Aida Wedo, the rainbow serpent. The ceremony symbolized transformation, shedding one's old life as a snake sheds its skin. But further inland, in hidden enclaves around Sokode and Blida, reports surfaced of rituals gone wrong. In 2021, Togolese authorities discovered an underground chamber containing ritual objects and remains believed to be human. The site's caretaker claimed it was a place of rebirth. Forensic analysis told another story. The serpent's association with rebirth and immortality has always attracted those who seek control over death. In West African cosmology, to merge with the serpent is to transcend mortality, to live in spirit beyond the physical realm. Some cult leaders exploit this symbolism to justify killings, convincing followers that the victim's soul ascends through the serpent to join ancestral power. In reality, the only ascension is fear used to bind obedience. In interviews with sociologists and survivors of such groups, a pattern emerges: charismatic leadership, secret oaths, and escalating demands for proof of loyalty. Members are often drawn from vulnerable populations, young men seeking wealth, women promised healing or fertility, and political aspirants hoping for protection. These cults thrive on secrecy, using intimidation and superstition to silence dissent. In several documented cases, defectors were reported missing within months of leaving. The overlap between spiritual and criminal motives complicates law enforcement. When police in Nigeria's Ogun State dismantled a suspected serpent cult in 2022, they found not only ritual objects, but also evidence of money laundering and human trafficking. Investigators concluded that the rituals served as cover for organized crime. Yet locals, even then, whispered that something spiritual lingered at the site. The dual reality of faith and fear remains inseparable. Throughout all these accounts, one truth stands out. The serpent's symbolism remains potent because it speaks to something deeply human. It is the embodiment of transformation, a creature that dies and is reborn, feared yet revered. In cultures shaped by cycles of suffering and renewal, the serpent promises both power and absolution. It is this promise, twisted by greed and desperation, that fuels the darker offshoots of the faith today. In Benin, elder priests still warn against those who speak to the serpent in the wrong tongue. Their meaning is simple: to invoke sacred power for selfish gain is to invite ruin. But for those caught in the web of modern cults, that warning often comes too late. Across villages, towns, and cities, the serpent's embrace endures sometimes as a blessing, sometimes as a curse, always as a mirror reflecting the most fragile parts of human belief. The first documented whispers of human sacrifice linked to serpent cults in West Africa appeared not in tabloids or rumor mills, but in police and anthropological reports from the late 1980s. These reports were sparse, coded in bureaucratic language, and often buried beneath layers of cultural sensitivity and political caution. Yet, within those lines, the patterns of something darker began to emerge. Disappearances in remote regions, unmarked graves, and unexplained rituals that defied official explanation. In 1987, a Beninese sociologist named Pascal Adjovi began a quiet investigation into ritual practices in the Mono and Zoo provinces. He was initially studying cultural resilience, how traditional Vodun beliefs survived colonial suppression and the spread of Christianity. But during interviews, villagers began to tell him about a small sect that called itself Sokpandan, the hidden serpent. Members were rarely seen in daylight. They held nocturnal gatherings marked by chanting and the beating of drums with snakeskin membranes. Locals said they offered something greater than goats. When Adjovi pressed further, his interviewees refused to elaborate, saying only, "The serpent does not eat twice." That cryptic phrase became a defining symbol of the investigations that followed. By the early 1990s, similar reports were surfacing in neighboring Nigeria, Ghana, and Togo, often dismissed as superstition until evidence began aligning across borders. In 1993, police in Nigeria's Kwara state investigated the disappearance of two brothers traveling to deliver livestock. Their truck was later found near a forest shrine adorned with serpent carvings and blood markings. Inside the shrine, officers discovered relics consistent with ritual practice: clay pots, animal bones, and human remains identified through forensic examination as male adults. Despite widespread suspicion, no arrests were made. The case file was closed quietly, labeled ritual activity. Throughout the 2000s, journalists began to uncover a disturbing link between spiritual exploitation and organized crime. A 2005 Guardian Nigeria investigation by reporter Chika Odua traced a network of ritual killings in Edo and Delta states. The report detailed how cult leaders promised followers prosperity and immunity through serpent covenants. Odua interviewed a survivor named Nosa, who had been lured into one such group after losing his business. He described being taken to a remote compound where the initiates knelt before a carved python idol surrounded by candles and incantations. "They told us we were joining a brotherhood of wealth," he said. "Then one night they brought a boy." His voice broke when he recounted the rest. "After that I ran, but they said I could not leave, that the serpent had already seen me." Cases like Nosa's are not isolated. In Ghana's eastern region, particularly in the forested zones between Koforidua and Aburi, local authorities in 2010 began investigating reports of nighttime gatherings involving masked figures and chants referencing the serpent's hunger. Initially believed to be armed robbers using fear tactics, the investigations took a darker turn when several missing persons were linked to the same area. Traditional rulers in the nearby Akwapim Hills confirmed that a splinter sect had been performing rituals outside sanctioned shrines. The sect, known locally as a Bonzam Fee, the Devil's House, mixed Christian iconography with serpent worship, a duality that confused and divided communities. Among their recovered ritual objects was a leather-bound book, handwritten in both English and Twi, listing names beside dates and phrases like "fed to the coil" and "spirit debt paid." Forensic analysis confirmed traces of human blood on several pages. The investigation was halted after local protests, citing fears of spiritual retaliation. The deeper one digs into these stories, the clearer the pattern becomes: secrecy, isolation, and silence maintained through fear. In nearly every verified case, the communities involved refused to speak publicly, often out of belief that discussing the serpent invites misfortune. This silence shields perpetrators, allowing the whispers to continue unchecked. In 2013, Beninese authorities reopened cold files involving ritual murders in the Zoo and Collines regions after reports surfaced of renewed cult activity. One case involved the remains of a young woman found near a disused shrine. Her body bore markings consistent with symbolic serpent tattoos drawn post-mortem. Nearby were 3 clay effigies representing the trinity of the serpent cult: Dan, the divine serpent; Aida, the rainbow consort; and Agbe, the keeper of secrets. The pattern of ritual arrangement suggested a symbolic offering meant to appease the serpent for prosperity. Investigators traced the site to a local spiritualist named Kofi Ade. When arrested, he denied murder but admitted to summoning Dan for healing and protection. During interrogation, he told officers, "The serpent does not demand blood, only those who cannot hear him do." His words mirrored a growing internal divide within traditional priesthoods, the old custodians condemning violence and new factions claiming divine instruction for sacrifice. As globalization expanded, so too did the spread of these beliefs beyond West Africa. Diaspora communities in Europe, particularly in France and the UK, began seeing smaller spiritual houses offering serpent protection rituals. While most were symbolic, some cases turned sinister. In 2019, French police investigated a ritual killing in Paris's 18th arrondissement involving a group of migrants from Benin and Nigeria. Authorities found evidence linking the ritual symbolism to Dan worship, including snake-shaped insignia and chants recorded on mobile phones. The French courts later ruled it an occult homicide. It was the first recorded instance of serpent-linked ritual murder outside Africa. Back in West Africa, journalists continued to face immense danger while reporting on these topics. In 2021, a Togolese investigative journalist, Ameyo Kufi, was detained after publishing an exposé titled "The Blood Beneath the Shrine." Her report documented first-hand testimonies from victims' families who accused certain religious leaders of using serpent imagery to cover up human sacrifice. She detailed how the alleged cult members targeted marginalized individuals, orphaned children, migrants, and those with mental illnesses, claiming they were spiritually unclean. The victims' disappearances were justified to followers as necessary cleansing. The government neither confirmed nor denied her findings, but weeks later, Kofi's car was found burned along a rural highway. She survived the attack but fled into exile. What makes these allegations particularly complex is the cultural overlap between symbolic offering and literal sacrifice. In many traditional systems, the term sacrifice, bo in Yoruba, kapata in Iu, haun in Fon, does not inherently imply killing. It may mean giving up food, time, or valuables to a deity. The perversion of this concept, turning spiritual devotion into physical harm, represents a profound distortion of the original faith. Yet when confronted, cult leaders often blur this distinction deliberately, exploiting the ambiguity to justify violence. In Nigeria's Delta region, a high-profile case in 2022 reignited national debate on ritual killings. Police uncovered a house in Ukele suspected of harboring a serpent cult. Inside, investigators found shrines decorated with serpent motifs, ritual drums, and containers of what was later confirmed to be human remains. 2 suspects confessed that the killings were intended to feed the serpent spirit for wealth. They claimed a spiritual leader had promised them invincibility if they offered blood under a full moon. When authorities traced the leader, he had fled across the border to Cotonou. Interpol later confirmed his arrest in late 2023. Community reactions remain divided. Traditional priests condemn these acts, asserting that true serpent worship seeks balance, not blood. Religious leaders, meanwhile, use such stories as proof of moral decay, fueling public fear and stigmatization of indigenous faiths. This tension between preservation and condemnation keeps the serpent's shadow alive. Across Benin, Ghana, Togo, and Nigeria, the pattern continues. A few genuine cults performing brutal acts, surrounded by millions of innocent adherents practicing ancient spirituality with peace. Yet the horror of the few overshadows the sanctity of the many. By 2024, human rights organizations began documenting the resurgence of ritual-related crimes under the umbrella term occultic exploitation. The UN Office on Drugs and Crime listed 28 verified cases in West Africa involving ritual killings disguised as religious practice, several with serpent-related symbology. Scholars describe these as modern mutations born from social desperation, economic inequality, and distorted theology. In truth, most of these killings are not about belief. They are about control. The serpent has simply become the language of manipulation, a sacred image hijacked by those who understand how deeply it resonates in the collective psyche of West Africa. Yet amid the fear, hope remains. Communities are beginning to speak. Survivors have started sharing stories on local radio, religious leaders now collaborate with law enforcement, and anthropologists continue to document the line between devotion and deception. The whispers of sacrifice may never disappear entirely, but the louder the truth becomes, the fainter those whispers grow. The stories of those who encountered the serpent cult, whether as victims, initiates, or investigators, reveal the human cost behind the headlines. Beneath the layers of secrecy and myth lie ordinary lives, farmers, students, mothers, and healers, each drawn into a shadow world they could not escape. The first documented survivor testimony to emerge publicly came from the outskirts of Abomey, Benin in 1998. A woman named Aminata approached a Catholic missionary with a trembling confession. She claimed her brother, a hunter, had been recruited into a small spiritual brotherhood, promising protection from misfortune. The group met every full moon near a river shrine dedicated to Dan, the serpent deity. Aminata attended one gathering out of curiosity, only to witness chants turn into frenzy. They said the serpent was hungry, she recalled. Then they brought a goat, but when it screamed, I saw that it was not a goat. The missionary reported her story to local police, but no formal action was taken. The village chief warned that investigating the shrine might bring disaster. A month later, Aminata vanished. Her disappearance became part of a growing pattern, whistleblowers and defectors simply disappearing. In 2001, Nigerian journalist Obinna Ez began a series of reports titled Blood Under the Moon, investigating ritual cults across the Niger Delta. His work took him to the riverine communities of Bayelsa and Ondo, where he encountered stories of secret serpent sects tied to local political figures. Eze met a young man, Timi, who had been initiated at 16 after his uncle promised him a future beyond poverty. Timi described his initiation in chilling detail, kneeling before an altar carved with two entwined snakes, swearing an oath to see and not speak. He said initiates were told their tongues would swell and their families would die if they betrayed the brotherhood. When Eze published the first installment, his newsroom received anonymous threats. By the time the third report appeared, Timi had fled his village. 2 months later, his body was found in the creeks near Sagbama, his tongue missing. The tragedy of Timi became a symbol of the serpent cult's reach, not just spiritual, but social, political, and psychological. For many, joining wasn't an act of belief, but of desperation. In regions where state institutions were weak, cult networks offered protection, belonging, and a sense of destiny. The cost was loyalty sealed by fear. In Ghana, sociologist Dr. Ya Owusu documented several interviews between 2005 and 2012 with former adherents of what locals called the Rainbow Serpent Fellowship. Most had joined seeking healing or wealth. One of them, Kwabena, was a trader from Takoradi who lost his business during the global financial crisis. A friend introduced him to a prophet who promised spiritual cleansing through serpent rituals. They said my ancestors had cursed my path, he told Owusu. To lift it, I had to feed the path with something pure. At first, the sacrifices were symbolic eggs, milk, kola nuts, but the rituals intensified. During one midnight ceremony in a forest outside Cape Coast, Kwabena said a child was brought forward, bound in white cloth. They said it was not a child, but a spirit reborn, he recalled. After that night, I could not sleep. The serpent came in my dreams. He left the cult soon after, but his wife reported he remained haunted by nightmares until his death in 2018. The psychological scars left by such experiences are immense. In a 2019 study conducted by the University of Lagos Department of Psychology, researchers interviewed 12 former cult members rescued from detention in southern Nigeria. All showed symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, dissociation, and severe guilt. One participant, a woman identified as Patient M, said she had joined the serpent sect after a miscarriage, seeking fertility. They said the serpent gives life, she said, but they took mine away. Her husband had been forced to pay ransom after her disappearance. When she was found, she was malnourished and incoherent, repeating the same phrase, "The serpent sees me." Law enforcement faces enormous challenges in dealing with these crimes. Many police officers privately admit that spiritual fear affects even investigations. A former detective in Accra, who requested anonymity, told a local newspaper, "We are trained to face guns, not gods. When you walk into a shrine and see skulls, snakes, and blood, something in you hesitates." This hesitation has allowed perpetrators to exploit superstition as a defense. In courtrooms, defendants often claim spiritual possession or mental illness. Convictions are rare. In Nigeria alone, between 2010 and 2023, over 40 reported cases of ritual killings involving serpent symbolism ended without sentencing due to insufficient evidence or community interference. But not all communities remain silent. In 2016, the town of Pollsmoor, Togo, became a turning point. After the disappearance of 2 schoolchildren, local women formed vigilante patrols. They stormed several isolated shrines, uncovering altars with remnants of human bones and serpentine carvings. Their discovery forced police intervention. The outcry led to a parliamentary inquiry on ritual crimes, the first of its kind in Togo's modern history. Among the testimonies recorded during that inquiry was that of Afi, a 22-year-old woman who had escaped a cult compound. She described being offered by her own father, a local healer, in exchange for ancestral power. She was locked in a hut for weeks, surrounded by snakes and made to fast. They said the serpent would choose who lives, she told the commission. Her survival was considered proof of divine favor. Afi now works with a rehabilitation NGO that helps survivors of ritual abuse. "We are told these things are culture," she said, "but culture should not eat its children." The economic motives behind serpent cults have become increasingly visible. Many operate under the guise of prosperity ministries or herbal healing centers. Investigations by the BBC Africa Eye team in 2022 uncovered a network stretching from Lagos to Cotonou, where cult leaders charged clients thousands of dollars for serpent cleansing rituals. Undercover footage showed ceremonies that blended Pentecostal-style preaching with traditional sacrifice, using snake imagery to evoke awe and fear. For participants, these rituals offer the illusion of control in a world of scarcity. Poverty, unemployment, and inequality drive people towards spiritual shortcuts. When a man cannot feed his family, he will listen to anyone who promises the serpent's favor, said a Ghanaian sociologist during a 2023 panel on occult economies. The ripple effects extend far beyond those directly involved. Families of accused cult members face ostracism, businesses collapse after exposure, and communities fracture under suspicion. In Ouida, Benin, historically the cradle of Vodun priests, now face hostility from residents who conflate their faith with the cult's crimes. "They have stolen our gods and used them for fear," said one temple priest. For journalists, the cost of covering such stories can be fatal. In 2020, Sierra Leonean reporter Ibrahim Conte was investigating alleged serpent-linked murders in the border town of Koindu. Days after publishing his first report, his home was burned down. His family escaped, but Conte was never seen again. Local police later claimed there was no evidence of foul play. The human rights community continues to push for recognition of ritual killings as a regional crisis. NGOs such as Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International have documented over 200 ritual-related deaths across West Africa between 2010 and 2024. Many cases remain unreported due to stigma or fear of reprisal. Survivors who do speak often live in exile or under protection. Some religious leaders have begun addressing the crisis directly. In 2023, a coalition of traditional priests in Benin and Togo issued a public declaration condemning human sacrifice in the name of any spirit. The declaration emphasized the difference between Vodun, a system of reverence and balance, and the serpent cults, which they described as predators wearing sacred skin. Their words marked a cultural shift. For the first time, the silence surrounding the serpent's name was broken not by outsiders, but by those within the tradition. Still, for many victims' families, closure remains elusive. In Nigeria's Edo state, Grace Omarui has spent 8 years searching for her daughter, a university student who vanished after joining what she thought was a prayer group. Police traced her last location to an abandoned lodge near Uromi, decorated with serpent murals. Grace visits the site every year, leaving flowers and a note that reads, "The serpent will not win." Each of these stories, Aminata, Timi, Kwabena, Afi, Grace, illustrates not just suffering, but endurance. They are the voices behind the veil of myth, the ones who dared to speak when silence was safer. The cult of the serpent thrives in the cracks between faith and fear, culture and crime. Its true power lies not in its rituals, but in the silence it commands. Breaking that silence comes at a terrible price, yet every voice that rises diminishes its shadow. And in villages, cities, and courtrooms across West Africa, those voices are beginning to rise. The cult of the serpent continues to exist on the margins of visibility, its legacy interwoven with West Africa's deepest spiritual traditions and its most modern challenges. The future of this phenomenon cannot be separated from the forces that sustain it: poverty, secrecy, cultural conflict, and the uneasy intersection between faith and fear. Understanding it requires more than condemnation. It demands that we face the questions it raises about identity, survival, and belief in a changing continent. In 2024, when Benin's Ministry of Interior launched an interfaith council on occult-related violence, it marked one of the first official acknowledgments that ritual crimes were no longer isolated incidents, but part of a wider social reality. The report that followed mapped the persistence of serpent-related sects across 4 countries: Nigeria, Benin, Togo, and Ghana. It concluded that most groups were not ancient orders but recent offshoots, modern reinterpretations of older serpent worship traditions blended with imported symbols and criminal enterprise. The council's findings were striking. Out of 87 identified cult structures, 61 had emerged after 2005. Their rituals, though wrapped in traditional language, often borrowed elements from contemporary religion, urban folklore, and online mysticism. Smartphones, encrypted chats, and digital temples had replaced the secret forests of old. Followers exchanged instructions through social media using snake emojis and coded phrases. Initiation videos surfaced on Telegram groups depicting modern youths kneeling before serpentine idols painted with fluorescent ink. Scholars now describe this shift as digital occultism, a mutation of traditional beliefs in the age of connectivity. The serpent's mythic power, once confined to shrines and oral tales, now travels freely through screens. With it comes a new form of manipulation. Cult recruiters exploit social anxiety and economic despair with hashtags promising spiritual elevation and ancestral riches. Investigators in Lagos traced one network that lured victims with online ads for money rituals guaranteed to bring wealth in 7 days. The scheme led to the discovery of 4 human remains in Badagry in 2023. Yet even as modernity reshapes these cults, resistance grows. In Ghana, university researchers and local priests collaborate on a project called Faith and Facts, which documents traditional practices to prevent their distortion. By distinguishing authentic ancestral rites from criminal imposters, the initiative seeks to reclaim cultural heritage from those who exploit it. One of its founders, historian Dr. Kojo Akodo, stated in an interview, "The serpent was once a symbol of wisdom and balance. It became a monster only when men turned it into fear." The reinterpretation of serpent symbolism is crucial to understanding how the cult persists. Across Africa, the serpent has long represented rebirth, protection, and the cyclical nature of life. In Yoruba cosmology, Oshumare, the rainbow serpent, bridges the earth and the divine. Among the fauna of Benin, Dan embodies cosmic harmony. But as globalization fragmented traditional authority, these once honored symbols were repurposed by opportunists who found power in fear. By demonizing what was sacred, they created control over those seeking meaning in chaos. This manipulation thrives where institutions fail. Across much of West Africa, distrust in police, courts, and government drives communities to spiritual intermediaries. The serpent cult fills a vacuum, offering belonging where the state offers neglect. In interviews conducted between 2018 and 2022, defectors repeatedly cited hopelessness as their reason for joining. A young man from Port Harcourt explained, "I had no job, no future. They told me I was born under a serpent sign, that my destiny was waiting. I believed them because no one else ever told me I had destiny." Religious leaders and reformers have begun addressing this vacuum. In 2022, a coalition of Christian and Muslim clerics in Nigeria's southwest launched a campaign titled Faith Against Fear, promoting interfaith unity against ritual violence. Billboards in Lagos and Ibadan displayed the message, "No serpent gives success, only sweat does." The campaign sparked public debate, with radio programs inviting survivors to share their stories. One of the most powerful testimonies came from Josephine, a mother from Osogbo, who had lost her teenage son to a ritual cult in 2020. "He was a good boy," she said on live air. "He wanted to help the family. They promised him power. They promised me he'd be great. Now I visit his grave." Her words resonated across Nigeria, turning grief into awareness. Beyond religion, civil society organizations are stepping in to combat the psychological and social toll. NGOs like Safe Haven Africa and Light Beyond Fear operate shelters for survivors of ritual captivity, offering counseling, legal aid, and reintegration programs. Their annual reports show a consistent pattern. Most recruits are between 15 and 30 years old, male-dominated, but increasingly female in recent years. Many have limited education, and nearly all were recruited through personal networks or digital platforms. Law enforcement is also adapting. Interpol's 23 report on ritual crimes highlighted West Africa as a key region for cross-border cult activity. Following joint operations between Nigerian and Beninese authorities, several key figures of a transnational serpent sect were arrested in Porto Novo. The operation, codenamed Ares Serpentis, revealed ritual items, financial records, and human remains transported across borders. Forensic data showed transactions linked to cryptocurrency wallets used for money laundering through spiritual services. Yet even with these breakthroughs, prosecutions remain rare. Cultural sensitivity, corruption, and fear hinder investigations. In many communities, witnesses refuse to testify. People say, "If I speak, the serpent will see me," one police officer in Ogun State admitted. It's hard to protect people from their own terror. That terror is both psychological and symbolic. In interviews, survivors often describe recurring visions of snakes or dreams of being watched. Psychologists attribute this to trauma, but local healers interpret it as spiritual residue, the lingering energy of broken oaths. This tension between belief and clinical explanation defines much of the modern debate. How does one heal what the mind sees as sacred and the body feels as fear? To answer that, some communities are turning to hybrid healing approaches. In Cotonou, the House of Dawn Therapy Center combines psychotherapy with traditional cleansing rituals without sacrifice. Founded by trauma counselor Adelaide Huanu, herself the daughter of a Vodun priest, the center helps former cult members reconcile faith with recovery. "We don't tell them to reject their gods," she explained. "We teach them that fear is not devotion." Educational efforts are also proving essential. Across West African schools, teachers now integrate lessons on critical thinking and cultural heritage into social studies curricula. Students are taught to distinguish between spiritual symbolism and criminal exploitation. In 2024, Nigeria's Ministry of Education launched Project Serpent Truth, an initiative that uses documentaries, plays, and podcasts to counter superstition. The program reached over 300 schools in its first year, with surveys showing a measurable drop in youth susceptibility to ritual recruitment myths. Cultural reformation, however, cannot happen without accountability. Activists continue to demand that ritual killings and cult-related abductions be classified as organized crime, not isolated cultural incidents. They argue that framing such acts as tradition allows perpetrators to evade justice. A 2023 UN Special Report on West Africa echoed this sentiment, urging governments to distinguish legitimate indigenous practices from violence masked as faith. Some governments are beginning to respond. Benin's National Assembly passed legislation criminalizing ritual exploitation with life imprisonment penalties. Ghana's 2025 Faith Transparency Bill mandates registration and auditing of all religious and spiritual institutions, a move welcomed by human rights groups but criticized by some clerics as overreach. Nigeria's progress remains uneven, but community-driven reforms, especially from youth movements and journalists, are gaining momentum. In parallel, digital activists are reclaiming the narrative online. The hashtag #Unmask. The serpent trended across African Twitter in 2024 after a viral documentary exposed a self-proclaimed serpent prophet operating in Cotonou. The social media outrage forced authorities to raid his compound, rescuing 4 captives. Young content creators and podcasters now use digital storytelling to demystify cult tactics and expose recruiters. For the first time, the serpent's myth meets resistance on its own battlefield, the internet. The growing transparency, though fragile, signals a new era. For decades, the cult of the serpent survived in darkness, protected by taboo. Now, cameras enter shrines once forbidden to outsiders. Survivors testify before courts. Scholars publish what was once whispered. Each act of exposure diminishes the cult's mystique. But exposure alone is not understanding. As anthropologists remind us, belief systems cannot be eradicated, only transformed. The serpent will remain a part of West Africa's spiritual imagination, but whether it symbolizes destruction or wisdom will depend on how the next generation interprets it. Already, that transformation has begun. In Benin, a new temple dedicated to Dan was consecrated in 2024, not as a secret shrine, but as a cultural museum. Visitors can observe rituals and learn their historical context. The priests, dressed in white rather than red, explain that their faith teaches balance, not blood. The serpent is not evil, one priest said. It only becomes evil when men make it hungry. For families like Grace Omarui's in Nigeria or Aminata's in Benin, this revival of truth is bittersweet. It cannot bring back the missing or erase the trauma, but it restores dignity to the idea of faith itself, separating heritage from horror. The future of the serpent cult, then, lies not in extinction, but in illumination. As light enters the spaces once ruled by secrecy, the myths lose their power to harm. When stories are told, when victims are named, when cultures reclaim their symbols, the serpent loses its teeth. And so the cycle may finally shift from fear to understanding, from silence to voice, from darkness to dawn. Because in the end, the serpent was never the enemy. Ignorance was.
This is Whispers in Africa. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the true crime documentary. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe and turn on the notification bell icon, so you'll be notified when we upload a new video. You can also tell us what you think about this documentary in the comments section. I hope to see you in our next video. Bye.